Thank you all for coming this Sunday afternoon to hear Sam and I talk about perspectives on light through our practice and a little bit about ourselves and the collaboration that we're doing together. Because we've got such an intimate group, we're going to make it really conversational, so you're welcome to be a part of the conversation as much as you want and ask direct questions that's brought your interest in coming here today. But otherwise, we'll just...
Yeah, light was really just sort of a framework to sort of have a bit of a chat. The origins of our relationship actually started with shooting a documentary together. So I'm a filmmaker, and obviously Angelina is an artist, and we started working together when you were looking for a documentarian to start making some content around your work. And I found the story of what you were doing so compelling that now we're shooting a long-form 90-minute documentary about Angelina's past, what she sort of, how she creates the work, and it's that's sort of like a long-term project. And then from that sort of evolved into collaborating on pieces of artwork and video artwork, which is something we are hoping to do more of in the future.
Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to do this talk is because as our work together through the documentary has evolved and through different filming sessions that we've done, there's been always this discussion on light and the role in light, and it's really brought my attention to how understated and unacknowledged the role of light is in all different facets of how we not only experience light in spaces, our daily life, but when we're watching something like film, when we're looking at an artwork, even when I'm making an artwork, being more conscious of how light works within the making of it, as well as then where it's going to be positioned and how a piece of artwork is lit up. And even when you get your work professionally photographed, with the first photographer I was working on for that, often the photographs wouldn't look like the actual artwork itself. And he's like, no, you've actually never seen how your artwork looks. This is what it looks like properly lit up. And then just realizing how much light transforms everything that we see and the role that it plays, and even how an artwork hanging on a wall can be in constant transformation by how much light it is in the presence of. And then when one of the biggest things that stood out to me, and my memory's not that great, but something about how film itself is playing or dancing with light. I remember there was one time.
Yeah, so obviously film is a two-dimensional medium, and the way to create the illusion of depth within that medium is by using light to create shape. And so trying to create shadow is sort of and shooting into the shadow is something that you're really focused on. And since we started collaborating, I've been experimenting more and more with celluloid and shooting on 16mm film, and that's a format that chemically requires light to even produce an image. And so, light is really important. But for me, coming from my background's largely as a cinematographer, so shooting commercials and documentaries, and so that's a very technical approach. And so my thought process behind it is, how do I just expose an image? Because as a starting point, if there's no light, you just can't see anything. But when you're looking at a canvas, you are coming to that thought process around light with an intentionality to begin with, as opposed to as soon as you put a camera up on something, there's already something that exists. And so to bring a creative process to photography or videography, you have to actually take away what already exists, and you have to intentionally apply a look to it. Because if you just walk into a space and just shoot it the way that the light already looks, then you're not actually bringing your creative prism to it. You're just filming what's there. And actually, I thought when we first started, because I didn't want to impose a look or a creative approach to what we were shooting, because I didn't really know the themes yet. With the first few times we were filming, I was just using available light, and I didn't want to do anything too drastic. And now when we shoot, there's a very specific high key light with a lot of shape because the themes are quite dramatic, and we've started shooting on an anamorphic lens that compresses the space, and so is that the shot is actually really squeezed, and then we de-squeeze it in post, and so Angelina is in the middle of the frame, and then everything else like falls away into this like hazy blur, so it's very centralized on you. Whereas if I imagine when you start a process, you've got a blank canvas and every single thing that happens you're physically doing. But with video, it's kind of already there. So
Yeah, it really is. It's true. But at the moment and going forward, I actually prefer not to paint on a blank canvas or a white canvas. It's more value to me if there's a painting on there and I'm either interacting with that painting before, and interestingly enough, working with light and whites to illuminate it up, but keep a presence of the painting underneath it, as opposed to, because then with a white canvas, a blank canvas is almost overexposed, so too much like white light actually eliminates everything anyway. And yeah, so in the past I would be working on white, and then out of white all the spectrum of colours exist, and they've got a different length in light. They've also got a different density and heaviness to them, and often a different amount of black in them. And so it's been really interesting in going from that perspective, and sometimes I'd paint on a white primer or a black primer, and if you've got a black primer that you're painting on, it absorbs all the light from the other colours on top. And so it really depends on what you're doing, and I did it always intuitively, and it was like this, working with colour and emotion, and I suppose in that way where the light did or didn't come through and I just knew something did or didn't work. But ever since I'd had that conversation with the photographer who photographed the work and used those big Amaran lights and showed me that I'd never seen my artwork before, I then started painting with those lights on and changing it to all the different light frames so I could see how the artwork looked on all those different spectrums of light, as well as, yeah, working with colour in that way. But it's through our conversations I've understood it more consciously, and then with the photographer. But then it adds a whole different thing of when you're working on a canvas that's already been painted and you're repurposing it, but in some way trying to leave something of it behind. And it just makes me think of that whole thing of shadow and light, if in a sense, because you need both to make the other visible. So if we have too much shadow and not enough light, we can't see what's in front of us. And then if we have too much light, we can't see anything anyway. And I think that that's probably something that is much more obvious and understandable to you when you do what you're doing, but maybe not, because you've even said like the lighting will tell the viewer how to feel about the person who's been lit.
yeah, it's really hard to keep working that consciously in my medium, because there are tropes that just always work, like a soft far side key light always looks, it's got shape and it's got, it's three-dimensional, and you shoot into the shadow and you get a Rembrandt triangle, which is a soft exposure of light just on the cheek, on the dark side of the face that you're shooting. And people fall into these same approaches on everything. And I did a web series last year, and an actor turned into the key light, and we were shooting into her face, and she was fully lit by the key light. And I was the DOP on that, and I was told that, well, we can't shoot her, she can't turn that way, like tell the director to tell the actor not to do that move, because she's then, we're shooting into the light, and she's facing the light, and we were going to just not do it because it doesn't adhere to that dogmatic rule of shooting into a far side key. So there's actually there's a real problem, particularly in narrative, where everyone just wants it to look cinematic. That word is thrown around a lot. People just want it to look cinematic, as opposed to the mood that it actually wants to have. And so people get very hung up on cheat codes and just ways to make it look like a Hollywood movie, as opposed to what am I actually trying to express with this. But I think it's largely because there's such a list of things to tick off on narrative. People are trying to tell a story, trying to capture performance. The production designers are running around and they've not had enough warning that you're going to turn around and shoot in the other direction, and so they're suddenly dressing a room, and then you're lighting it on top of that, as opposed to, say, with photography, it would be a lot higher in the priority list. So narrative probably doesn't get to use light as consciously as it could, which is why I find what you do so interesting, and why often actually cinematographers look to painting for references, because painters, every decision about the light has been made consciously. But if you pull up a camera and start filming a video, whatever the sun is doing, the sun is doing. Yeah. And you can modulate it, but it's not always a decision. Quite often it's more about creative problem solving rather than trying to express something. So yeah, a lot of the time I feel like you ask me questions about my opinions about light, and I kind of feel like your thoughts about it are probably more valid because you've thought about it more.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So in a way, when you film, you're working with the light that you've got in the best way you can, and it keeps making me think of the photographer as well. If you get the light right in the moment when you're filming, it makes the editing part much more flexible on what you can do with it. Is that?
Well, you can do an awful lot now in post, and you can make it look almost entirely different, but really great. Kind of like the cinematographer everyone kind of agrees is the best living cinematographer would be Roger Deakins, and I get the impression from him that he shoots the look that he wants on the day, and then it's like little minute changes later. Or he does things like he'll have a light source in a shot, and he'll be planning on replacing that light source with a fire. So in 1917, they shot the whole film as to look like a single take. And there was a scene with a burning building, and the building had huge lights built into it coming out of the windows. And when the camera sees the building, the camera's seeing all these lights, but he knew that in post-production they were going to replace the windows with VFX of flames. And so it's sort of a way to not sort of make creative decisions later, but to have a plan for what you want the final outcome to be from the beginning, and then work towards that with things like VFX, as opposed to relying on it to solve your problems. But that's sort of that really high-level thought process that more people should work with, but because technology is so accessible now, a lot of people will pick up like a $4,000 Sony mirrorless camera and put cinematographer on their business card, and then just shoot that one look that I told you about before, which is a soft far side key, and everything's shot with that look, and it's like, oh, it's so cinematic because there's lots of shape, but it's not necessarily the right mood for the scene. It's like a factory approach to creativity, which I think that's kind of the distinction between art and just making pretty pictures, is having an intention and trying to communicate something, whether it's a story or a mood, and that approach that I told you about is really just trying to create pretty pictures.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've both got the same assumptions, like that I can probably know more about light because I've got complete control and I do it intentionally on the camera, and I think that you've got a lot more control, and because I've seen how you set up lights and do things differently, and you could even tell, like with the lighting that we had here, the difference that the good lighting would make, and then there's a certain light that has a flickering effect on the eye, and you could identify how like the sensory input of certain lights do that. Whereas in with the painting and how light works in art, I'm very intuitive and not, I don't plan it and consciously control it. I don't ever try to control the artwork, but just from doing, I've learnt a lot of it, and I like to live with it in my home and see how the light, just a natural light during the day, because even yesterday we went and installed a painting in a residence building here, and she has a certain lighting that her house is set on, and she wanted to see how it would look in her place, and there's nothing you can do with that. And we were lucky that we were there over the time of the light changing from day till night, so we could see the transitions of how the light worked and how it worked in her place, and if that was something that she wanted. But because that's what then I do, is just as a person, like living with it and seeing how it goes, I've learnt from it that way. And then I also always match it with an emotion, so I paint from emotion and I work with colour. And it's really interesting because like in cinematic storytelling, we look for the tension, or we look for the dramatic lighting in the contrast, where my life's so full of tension that in the art, like I'm coming from that an extreme, and I'm trying to find the peace in the art and take that all out. But then I just realised like it needs to stay there, otherwise we don't see the calm, or we don't see the light, or we don't see those shades. But then just in everyday light, with everyday lighting that the majority of people have, how do these works have it in there? And then what actually changes once you start to put texture into the artwork and build out of the canvas sculpturally, which I've started to do. It's changed everything because of shadow. And it makes me kind of think of your transition from working on the digital then going to the celluloid, because that's given so much texture to what you can film in celluloid pieces. But I don't have as much control. I'm not as conscious of the amount of control over light I have in it. I've just felt my way through it, basically. But become more conscious of it through the collaboration.
I've got a comment. I can't remember the artist's name, but I think it's in the Multidisciplinary Studio from Italy. They did a work a few years ago at NGB, and I've since seen a book of it. And it's projecting different coloured light. So it's the RGB colour combination. So they print these like wallpaper. They print these incredible wallpaper images. And when they switch the light, so you've got a red, green, blue light, it brings out different images in the work.
Yeah, I've seen this, yes.
Just as you talk about it, you're talking about kind of white light or natural light. I'm just wondering about what would happen if you did that kind of colour light interplay on your work.
Yeah, well, that's what.
You know, like,
I've thought about all this.
The dial of your light. What's the next layer if you do it?
Yeah, and I have one of those lights that you can change all the colours on it, and I used to actually do it on top of the coloured work as well, and see how it changed the work. And then now with doing just different textures in different tones of white, I've got that idea of then projecting the different colour light on it, or different coloured images on it. And that's one thing that is really interesting between like film, light and art, and where things I think are going. Because when you go around to Japan and you go to the team labs, or you go to all the light installations that they've got on top of their castles, through the cherry blossoms, when you go through, they make an art installation like indoors and outdoors, using art, the different coloured lights, and also just the immersive experience of it. And they've started to do it a little bit at the Loom, but then what Japan's doing, and I was speaking to a lady yesterday, they're doing it a lot in America too, is that whole thing of using the colour and the coloured lights either over other artwork, over different textured surfaces, and even on buildings. And we've had it a bit here with the white night. So it's in a way really interesting, and something that, did you have any?
I guess that leads a little bit into how you light art, and even just how we had to approach this space, because this room doesn't have very many PowerPoints, and so we were trying to get light on all the work, which is part of why there are softboxes in 2 spaces, because it was a way for one PowerPoint to help with large spaces, and then there's a few that have little film lights, tubes and things. And the reason to use film lights is because one of the qualities of light is its color rendering. And light is a spectrum of colors. And if you have something like these that aren't intended for anything other than sort of functionality, the spectrum of light that they cover will miss parts of the color spectrum. Particularly LEDs are bad with this. Sunlight has a very high color index. Fire, tungsten lights, they're all really pure, and they cover a lot of the spectrum. But these lights will just be missing huge parts of the color spectrum. And so if, for example, you put a painting under that light and only that light, that color was missing, it just wouldn't appear at all. In the same way that if you shine a red light that's just red onto a painting, all you'll see is red. If you then use one of these like white lights that's missing parts of the spectrum, you'll see like a red that's kind of gray because it's not got all of that spectrum. So that's part of why to use the film lights to show things. But then back to your question, if you shine a red light on a painting that has sort of yellow and peachy colours like that one over there, it will start to change the way that they register. And so a technique that you could experiment.
Your artwork has 4 scenes.
Yeah.
A scene in white light, a scene in red light.
Yeah.
Just scene in green.
So you could have like a different light set up for each colour, and as you're painting one painting, you could be seeing it in 4 different ways. But also, I imagine that just executing it in one way is really hard, and doing it 4 ways at once would probably be like.
Yeah, but on that note, and just thinking in terms of where you can go with exhibitions and galleries, if that was a way to do it, it would make the exhibition experience more of an installation, and the artwork transforming in kind of real time for the viewer experience. Would that need a particular kind of lighting in the space itself, or could you just do it something like in what we've got here, or does it change it depending on the lighting of the space?
You'd probably have to do a boutique fit out to make that work. Yeah.
I saw something like it in Sydney. I guess it was all perhaps as large as that, maybe. And it was largely white, and it had a countdown timer. It was flooded with light as you approached it. Oh, what's the countdown for? Because it was a gallery space I'd not been in. And then when it ran out, it started going through. There was a lighting rig, and light sequence, and a soundtrack, and it just transformed the whole. It was a trick of the eye, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
In terms of the painting was very textured. But the friend of mine I was with, seeing it, we both saw very different things
Yeah.
as it went through the change. So some were very highly spotlighted,
Yeah.
and then others was more generalised. And there wasn't that much, it's so long ago, there's so much, I think there were variations of white light, if you like. I don't think there was any particular colour as such, just shades of white in the lighting of it, and it was just brilliant. And sort of esoteric music playing, and then you would finish, and then the time would come up again for the next sequence. But very memorable. So it's
Yeah.
the kind of thing. If we're speaking of sounds, but I think it would have been a lot of work in designing and setting it up, both lighting and the soundscape. I don't know. But,
When Angelina got this opportunity, and we were talking about the fact that there were so few PowerPoints, I suggested that I could use one PowerPoint to refract light through a space. and then going back and forth on that and playing was how that glass monstrosity came to be, which is fencing wire and broken mirrors and duct tape. And yeah. And so, yeah, the interesting thing I think about what you're talking about is the level of intentionality that would come from having to do that precise work. And with that one, I wanted to make it as difficult as possible to do anything intentionally and then just turn a light on and see what happened. Right. Jack White used to talk about playing these plastic guitars from the 60s that he could barely keep in tune, and when he was playing them in the White Stripes, it was like fighting the guitar, and there was a certain amount of conflict just with him keeping it going. And you were talking about having a certain level of internal conflict that you're always dealing with, and my life is so suburban, I have to manufacture it with fence wire. And even just the sharp edges, I liked making that. So that was a lot of fun. And then it was interesting that your work is so textural, the idea of making something that would interplay with it in terms of light. And I thought that you'd be precious about the idea that my thing would be like impacting your work in a certain way that you hadn't intended, but you're really open to it, so that's worked out well.
And it just naturally worked out well because the shards of glass, and on those particular paintings I'd used a thick palette knife, so the shards of glass almost look like a palette knife stroke of light on the paintings, and so it just like naturally worked well. But I do love what you said about your experience in Sydney, and it's very interesting to me because the more I've seen, that's a thing that seems to be coming, and I understand why it's so memorable to you as well. I think because there was an engagement in it, because there was all of a sudden it changed in real time for you, so you become a part of the experience, and you and the person that you were with experienced it differently. And so there's that. So there's your experience, your friends, that conversation, and then what's being put in front of you by the artist by using the sound, the timing, the light, and then the artwork itself. And I think that, that's what's a really kind of exciting thing to be able to do, and what gets exciting with filmmaking as well, because you've got that image that can move, and you can use sound, and then you can even use word, as well as make the light do all of that work for you in a different way, that whether the viewer consciously picks up on what's going on, they're getting that immediate experience because that's been.
It's funny, the more we work together, the more I want to do less and have my work feel more like a painting, and the more excited you are about all the other stuff. So by the end, maybe you'll be filming me painting.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's fun because different mediums and different processes can do different things in terms of, because all art forms is a form of communicating, whether or not we use words or not. There's that experience, and it is always kind of in a state of change because we all experience it differently, and it gets that conversation with or without words going. So yeah, I do find the film thing really, really interesting because you can use image that moves as well as words, sounds. And I do have this, like, I think ideal thing going on in my head that you kind of can master light in a way that it's a bit harder to with the artwork.
Well, on a film set, really great cinematographers talk about wanting to, when you first start, you keep things simple, and you'll be in that situation, like I said before, where you'll be trying to just get to that one look and apply that look to everything, and then you get bored of that and you start trying to do different things and create different moods, and you start mixing colored light and things like that, and start doing more experimental stuff, and then eventually you get to the point where you have like 20 fixtures up, and you have one thing doing a little accent on the background, and you have one thing bringing up the ambient light, and then you have 20 fixtures, and then the people who have been doing it for decades will try to get to the point where they have like 2 fixtures, and it's just 2 lights, and that's doing everything, and they're just trying to get it down to something really minimal and small, because everything else is kind of it's sort of over manicured, and it's particularly something that's really easy to do is diffused light, because you can put a COB, a small cluster of LEDs, into a softbox, and then you can make a big wash of soft light in an area. But it's very rare that in real life light will do that. Like the sun doesn't naturally sort of go through a huge curtain. Like sun tends to, if like in this space, if the sun comes through here, it'll bounce off the ground, and then you'll be lit by a light that's on the ground. And then, you know, that's being lit from underneath is kind of unpleasant and ghoulish. And so you look at the real world, and I guess that's probably the biggest takeaway of what great cinematographers will do, is they observe the real world and then will take inspiration from that and try and recreate that or elements of that, as opposed to having the light on a stick and be like, where's the light on the stick going? Oh, I'll put it in that corner. You know, it's rather than the execution first, it's important to think of what the outcome you're trying to achieve first, because there are so many technical challenges with filmmaking. Like I did a web series at the start of the year that was multicam, and so I was in a corner with a huge 15-kilo cinema camera and an assistant behind me running a cable. But then there was a guy in the other corner with the exact same thing, and we're both shooting actors, and we'd be shooting over the actor's back, but then that meant that we're both seeing a corner of the room, and then if we ever moved, you'd see the rest of the room, and so there was nowhere on the floor to actually put any light stands or anything. So we had to rig all the lights into the ceiling, but then we were shooting this bedroom out in one day, so we had to do, you know, like 3 days work in one day, and so I had to basically rig lights along all of the walls, talk the director into never seeing above sort of a certain height on the wall, and then whenever we would change an angle, I would manipulate the light so as it would come up and down, so that there was shape. But that wasn't really designed for mood. It was just, how can I do anything under these horrendous shooting conditions?
When you speak about shape, what does that actually mean in terms of film?
Well, you see cinematographers walking around doing this a lot, and that's them making a face with their hand. And so like here you'll see there's a top light, there's shadow under here, that's the shape. The shadow is generally the shape. And you get some shape from the different textures of light. Like if there was, like there's some ambient light coming back this way and there's that light coming down here, but you're always looking for where the shape is. And if, for example, we were shooting this way and there was a light coming this way, I'd probably try and block that light so that we maintain the shape, which gives us the sense of three-dimensionality, which is why when on that shoot, we shot into the actress's face and the light was behind us, I was told that it was wrong. And it's like, you can't do that because there's no shape. But sometimes in life, people have a light in their face. So it's, yeah, the fact that people get that dogmatic and say you can't do it is a bit silly. Another big one would just be how bright they are illuminated. So you want them to be really bright and to pop off the background. But if you look at really big films that are done by really accomplished cinematographers, quite often their faces will be really dark and they might just have little pinpricks of light in their eyes so that you can pick them out. And it's not necessarily just like a cookie cutter approach.
Talking about shape, I think like in terms of the closest thing I could get to with a piece of art that's not decorative that's what I might say is, like it can be decorative and it can be used for decoration or just adding something to a room, but what that little thing that an artwork could do that maybe separates it from being decorative in and of itself is that it does have that little bit of maybe shape in it, even if you're working with something with abstracts or you're working with something that has just got different whites, which is what I do. It has that something of a shape in it, and then how you sometimes, you said it can't happen in reality, but it's not real if it's in that context, and then it just has something that's just a bit So it brings me to the quote like that truth is beauty and beauty is truth. So in an artwork, it's beautiful, but it might not be entirely pretty. There's a beauty to it because there's something truthful in it. And often it's that perfection and imperfection. So it's just something there that gives it a bit of shape that invites the viewer to see differently, or invites the viewer to be in the presence of something that's not like kind of prescribed to them. It's got enough room for them in it, but it's got something a little bit jarring or a little bit shape in it that demands you to kind of look at what you see in a way that when we're seeing things that we've always already seen before, we stop seeing them. And so that's kind of what I get from as you're talking and translating it into how.
This question isn't about light, but with art, when you make the decision, what makes something that you've made feel like it qualifies as art or an expression versus something that just feels decorative? Like, do you ever have something that comes out and you just feel like I'm not present in this, and this is just.
Yeah, because it doesn't feel alive. Like it doesn't feel. So there's so many different phases that it goes to, but if I'm like bored of it after a while, like even if it looks pretty, it's not alive and you can't continue. It's kind of like a dead piece. So that's how if it's like constantly, if the piece holds enough space where you can see it differently every day because you're in a different state or emotion every day, like the piece has got something going on with it. I don't know if I'm entirely answering your question because my mind's fixated on the thing that you were saying about light. And I think it's the same with painting. You've got to know when to stop or when to not overdo it. Like that less is more, and maybe sometimes the natural light just does it better and you've got to let it.
Yeah. We filmed a commercial at the aquarium, and I had this gigantic $20,000 light brought in to light this huge space, the big window thing, and you could see all the fish going by and stuff. And we just had this locked off camera and a little girl looking through the window, and I was blasting this huge light and then bouncing it back in. And the director let me do it for about an hour, and then he finally said, I think you're fighting the space a little bit. And we turned it off, and she was just silhouetted, and it was infinitely better. But we had the expensive light, and so
You want to
there's,
use it.
yeah, well, I didn't even want to, like if I didn't realize how much it cost, and if I had a larger crew and a gaffer just happened to turn it on and be like, do you like this? I would have said no. But there's a conflict with executing things on a small scale as a cinematographer, where you have a small crew and you're physically lugging all the gear in yourself, and you know how much you've taken out of the budget to get the expensive light, that you're in conflict with the technical requirements of pulling it off, as opposed to just the larger projects I've done where someone just taps me on the shoulder and says, do you like this? And they turn something on, and I go, no, I don't. It's different. But even just like in this space that I walk around here looking at the PowerPoints all the time.
Yeah.
And I look at the paintings that are between fixtures, and then I look at the PowerPoints and I just go, And it's not a case of what would I like. I'm always in conflict with what's possible. And I think that's probably the deciding, or the definition of being an independent filmmaker, is what you can pull off and react to what's available. So like the last film I made was a fake autobiography about myself, where I was filming a documentary, but it was filming me filming the documentary. And that was a reaction to what we had available. I'm at home with 3 kids under 4, and I can get a mate to come over and just film me struggling to parent. And I have a background in stand-up comedy, so I can make that funny and we can kind of make something out of it. But it's a reaction to what's available, and we make funny things that still has some pathos and some catharsis, and it's leading up to like a bigger piece. but it's a reaction to what we have. And it's that piece in particular actually is sort of, rather than ingest life and sit on it for years and write a script and then give it to actors and get them to embody it and then get a DOP to shoot that and then get an editor to cut it, I'm immediately living something and then reflecting on it, and then the next day I'm reliving it on purpose, staging it through improv with my kids and getting my friend to film me. And yeah, so that's sort of an interesting, I'm trying to get closer to what you're able to do with the immediacy of just pick up a paintbrush and go. Whereas like the Kevin Smith has a joke about, if you want to be an artist as a filmmaker, you need $10 million in Ben Affleck.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I'm really getting from this conversation. Like, it's just so different for me and with what I do. What interests me is when I make a piece of art is that it might not work. So it's always like working even with that tension. I don't know if it will work. And I like the fact that I might fail, but I don't want to fail, but I like that kind of challenge. Whereas with what you do, because of all that production, and even, as you said, I hired this light, that's all this money. I just don't have to take those things into consideration. Like, there's expenses that, yes, but not to that scale, and not involving whole other people and having to get them back if something doesn't work. And then just with the light component and seeing how color and texture and shadow all works, a matter of having one of those lights that I can scale the light up and back and see it. So it's just two different, like, I think it would be terrifying to the point of possibly paralyzing if you go in with that thing, oh, I don't know if this is going to work. You'd set up all to cover all areas going in, because it's a totally different medium and costs.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's why I'm reacting to those larger projects by filming me as myself. Rather than writing a script and giving it to actors, I don't even have to sit down and write it. I can write some story beats and then do 3 versions of it, and then when I get bored, we just stop filming. And yeah, the risk is really low, and so that we can just do it, which is me trying to get closer to the immediacy of a process like yours.
So when you can work in contexts like that, do you find that the art or the usable material comes because you don't have that pressure?
It's so much better, particularly because it is comedy. Trying to find inspired moments of comedy where you're not writing a joke and then handing it to an actor who may or may not understand what makes it funny. Yeah, it can die 100 times before an audience watches it. Whereas what we're doing, it's different because what we're making is a piece that is intensely vulnerable and kind of about having a midlife crisis as you have 4 kids and you live at home and you watch your career slowly fade away while you raise children. Yeah, so it's just about being very raw and brave and vulnerable and just filming a kind of mental breakdown, but being as honest about it as possible. And so it almost is documentary because it's so close to literally, like, it will have happened the day before and then we redo it. But then it's so much funnier than if it was canned and it was, yeah, like I said, when it's written, it can die there. When an actor is reading it, can die there. And then, yeah, but then coming back to light, talking about the idea of light, because we're working with kids and I'm doing 5 different roles at once, it's literally like, turn the lights on, which ones look shit, turn those 2 off, and let's go. Yeah, and that's it. But there's such a different tier of decision making with that, as opposed to on a commercial, I will sit there looking at the light all day because I'm not allowed to make any decisions about anything else. So yeah, light is suddenly all I do. Yeah.
So it takes on that, but then I suppose the payoff that you get in the other thing, you're getting it real in the moment. So rather than an actor going through that, you're getting something really in real time, and then that adds its own kind of light or visibility or exposure in a different way of what's possible in the different things.
Yeah, I think maybe what's I find so appealing to painting and to artwork is how stripped back and focused it is. And you probably don't think of it that way because it's what you do. But when you're considering light and color and movement and performance and literal story and time, I guess that's probably the biggest thing that film has, is that it exists over a period of time, a set period of time. And when you're thinking of a 90-minute feature film, you're constantly thinking about the audience's attention span at 12 minutes and engaging them with an inciting incident at 12 minutes. And then at the end of Act 1, half an hour in, you need the story to start going, but then stories die in Act 2, so you need propulsive story beats. And like, by the time I've done all of that and I've thought about performance and camera like lenses and things, like I was pretty harsh about people that just use the exact same lighting approach on everything, but also there's just so much to think about that it does also make sense. We just put the light in that corner and just leave it there.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, it's part of the appeal to, like, making that sculpture kind of felt like going back to the purest version of creativity, which was just, oh, that's interesting. I'm just going to wrap more wire around it. Oh, it kind of looks like a tree now. Oh, I guess I'll use more wire. Ah, I need bigger shards of glass. Ow, that hurt. Actually, that's kind of cool. Maybe I should break them more. Maybe it's dangerous. I'm going to swap to Perspex.
Yeah, and I think that you made that because of your filmmaking background, like someone making a sculpture, or I think that all of that knowledge was enabled you to go freestyle with that. And so to me, like, that's quite strikingly unique, because it's not, like, it's not familiar, if you know what I mean, and the impact it has on the space and everything feels quite unexpected.
I think the most important thing creatively to always hold on to is just like, what's fun? What am I enjoying doing right now? And it doesn't have to be like gleeful fun, but like, you get tunnel vision and you're like, all I want to do is play with this fence wire.
Yeah.
And everything else goes away, and that's all you can think about doing. And you'll be, like making dinner, and you're like, oh, I need to buy more duct tape, and then you just stop and you like go. Suddenly you're at Bunnings.
Yeah, because it ends up telling you what it needs,
I was going to
use
use like a glue gun, and then I was like, oh, but like they're going to be coming on and off so much. And yes, the minute I swapped to gaffer tape, suddenly,
it opened up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Silly.
Anything gaffer tape can't do.
Be cheap. That's expensive.
Used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the big thing that was a takeaway for me, just in thinking about it, and ever since I've always had this thing, like, art has the power to transform how we experience daily life, whether it be in like private spaces, public spaces, commercial spaces. Just the presence of it makes such a difference. But then from all of this, I've broken it down even further, and it's actually the transformative power of light that comes like as a precursor even to it's how we maybe work with light through art that then has that. It's really opened up my thinking deeper into what is that transformative power, because light literally in so many ways that we're just used to on an unconscious level and we're responding to all the time is having a transformative experience on it, even like our awareness is brought to, what it's not, and what the light focuses on, and then what it conceals. Like that, yeah, it's just endlessly fascinating. So thank you. Yeah.